Welcome to the Exploring Unschooling podcast. I'm Pam Laricchia, longtime unschooling mom and author. Join me and my wonderful guests for interviews, information, and inspiration about unschooling and living joyfully with your family. You can find the episode show notes, your free introductory ebook, What is Unschooling, and lots more information at livingjoyfully.ca. And here's the show. Hello, everyone. I'm Pam Laricchia, and this is episode number 120 of the podcast. It's the 18th of April, 2018, as I record this intro. This week on the podcast, I speak with Erin Human. Erin is an unschooling mom of two, and she joins me to talk about her experiences with unschooling and autism. Erin has an autistic son and was diagnosed with autism herself as an adult. She's also a wonderful artist and is the art director for Autism Women's Network, as well as co-founding director of Autistic Families International. We dive into her family's journey to unschooling, her autism diagnosis, why unschooling is such a great fit for autistic children, ways unschooling groups can be more welcoming to autistic children, and lots more. As a personal update this week, really the most fascinating thing has been the weather. Last night I was talking to Rocco and I described walking on our driveway as what, as a kid, I imagined walking on the moon to be like. Uneven and crater-like, as the slushy ruts and boot prints all over the driveway had frozen solid. The weekend was a cornucopia of snow, sleet, hail, and freezing rain, covering our cars in alternating layers of all sorts of water interpretations. We were actually pretty lucky to have only lost power for a couple of hours. And it's still going to be cold and white for the next few days, so we'll see where we are next week. And a huge thank you to everyone who has chosen to support my unschooling work on Patreon. I deeply appreciate all my patrons and their generous support. It's vital to helping me share unschooling information and inspiration with anyone who wants to explore the fascinating world of unschooling. And a big thank you to new patrons Edna Edwards and Peter Jones, and to patrons Stevie Puckett, Heather Struve, and Elizabeth for increasing their pledges. And this week, I wanted to just take a few minutes to talk about my Patreon. It's been around for about a year and a half now, and in that time, I've learned so much about myself, my unschooling work, you guys, and your needs and wishes, and even Patreon itself. And over the last month or so, I've been contemplating what a kind of Patreon 2.0 might look like. So since 2016, the Patreon support has grown bit by bit, eventually covering my out-of-pocket podcast-related costs, which has been wonderful. Thank you. Now I'm envisioning expanding the Patreon to cover the time I spend creating the podcast, and I committed earlier this year to reaching episode number 200. As well as creating additional content that I've been really wanting to get to, like YouTube videos and epic blog posts, as well as overhauling my website to make it much more user-friendly so that you can quickly find the content, whether it's podcast episodes, blog posts, articles, and so on, that dive into the specific question you have on your mind in that moment. So as I thought about that, the next question became, how can I thank you guys for generously supporting my time and effort in creating what I hope is valuable content that explores unschooling and what unschooling looks like in our lives? And in playing with that question, I definitely want to thank my amazing group of existing Patreon supporters. Hi, and thank you for kicking around ideas with me. Your feedback has been invaluable. So without further ado, I want to share the new reward tiers that I've come up with. And just a quick note, I wanted to share this sneak peek of them with you guys in anticipation, but my Patreon page won't be updated to its glorious 2.0 edition until next week. Basically, I'm just too excited about it not to share it right now. So, Number one, the first tier, Friends of the Podcast tier, for pledges of $1 or more per month. It may seem small, but it's definitely not. Every little bit truly makes a difference, and I appreciate even $1 of support from the bottom of my heart. You guys will be listed on the patrons of the show page on my website, and I will give you a big hug if we ever meet in person, as long as you're a hugger. I will always ask. And of course, you'll continue to enjoy a new podcast episode every week, as well as new blog posts and YouTube videos on my channel as I make them. Next is a Dress Up Your Desktop tier, which is $3 or more per month. So here you'll get everything in the $1 tier, plus each month I will create and share with you a new unschooling related quote image that you can use as wallpaper or screensaver images on your computer. So basically use them as happy little reminders from me, guideposts on your unschooling journey to help you refresh and refocus. And soon you'll have a nice collection of them. The next tier is the All the Books tier at $5 or more per month. Thank you for your awesomeness here. You'll get everything above in the previous two tiers, plus ebook copies of all my unschooling books, including new books as they are released. And most likely before they are publicly released. My patrons got the ebook edition of the Unschooling Journey book a week or so before it was released. Now, the next tier is called the Community Forum tier, and that's $10 or more per month. At this level, you'll get the monthly wallpaper images, all my unschooling books, plus access to a private Living Joyfully with Unschooling community forum. So join other like-minded unschooling parents who are actively living and learning alongside their children. It's our own private online community where we can have after the show conversations to dive deeper into podcast episodes and share our day-to-day insights, epiphanies, and conundrums. We can even work our way through the Unschooling Journey, a field guide, like as a book chat, because I know now you have a copy. And our last tier, it's called the Monthly Video Chat tier, and that's at $20 or more per month. And to celebrate your generosity at this level, you'll get the monthly wallpaper images, all my unschooling books, access to our private community forum, and each month I'll invite you to join me for a video chat. So maybe I will share a talk that I've given. Maybe we'll pick a topic to dive into together. Maybe we'll talk about your questions. Each month we'll figure it out together. And no worries if you can't join us live. I will record them and have them available for you to watch anytime. So those are the tiers. And as I said, every single dollar helps. Your support helps me to freely share unschooling information and inspiration with anyone who wants to explore the fascinating world of unschooling. And last but not least, there's one aspect of how I run my business that I don't think I've actually talked about before, so I thought I'd share it. And that is that I work with and pay other unschooling parents as much as possible. My transcribing team for the podcast is made up of unschooling moms. My book editor, who has edited all my books, is an unschooling mom. As is Hema, of course, who did the illustrations for my book, The Unschooling Journey, and you heard her on the podcast. Not only are unschooling parents creative, engaged, determined, and all-around wonderful people to work with, I love the idea of keeping the money circulating in the community as much as possible. We are supporting each other round and round. So you can check out the Exploring Unschooling page at patreon.com. That's patreon.com/exploring unschooling. And just remember, the new page with the new rewards will launch next week. Now, of course, you can pledge now at any level and you will automatically receive the new rewards. Pledges are processed at the beginning of each month, so not until May 1st, which gives me just enough time to get that online forum shipshape as well. Okay, so let's get back to this week's podcast episode, which I am super excited to share. And this week's quote is from Erin. I actually think that autistic children are a perfect fit for unschooling. I really see the foundation of unschooling as being that relationship of mutual trust and respect between parents and children. I think that is really the bedrock of unschooling. And that is the way that autistic children really thrive, is to have that relationship with their parents where you trust that your child's unique perceptions are valid and that their unique way of being is a valid way to be. I think Erin really nails it here. You trust that your child's unique perceptions are valid and that their unique way of being is a valid way to be. And in that foundation of mutual trust and respect, autistic children thrive. And now, on to my conversation with Erin. Hi, everyone. I'm Pam Laricchia from livingjoyfully.ca, and today I'm here with Erin Human. Hi, Erin.
Hello.
Hello. Erin is an unschooling mom who also draws comics, infographics, and neurodiversity-themed designs. She's the art director for Autism Women's Network and co-founding director of Autistic Families International. I've really enjoyed reading around her website, and I'm so excited she agreed to chat with me. Yay! So to get us started, Erin, can you share with us a bit about you and your family?
Sure. I am married. My husband is Mike, and we have 2 kids. We live in Omaha, Nebraska, and we moved out here a little over a decade ago. We had met in Boston, and we're looking for somewhere more affordable and family-friendly. So we really like it here in Omaha. It's a really good place to raise a family and a good place to be a homeschooling family. My husband is a truck driver. And he has a local route, so he's home normal working hours. He's not gone a lot. And I've done a few different things over the years. I've done illustration and house painting. Right now, I mostly do the volunteer work that you had mentioned with Autism Women's Network and a little bit of my own blogging and design.
Oh, that's awesome. So I am definitely curious how you discovered unschooling and what your family's move to unschooling looked like.
Yeah, I would say it wasn't sort of a straightforward linear progression. It was a lot of different things kind of all pointed in the same direction around the same time. I think, before we had kids, I never really thought about homeschooling or certainly not unschooling. I just kind of figured we'd do the usual thing that everyone else did and send them to public school, kindergarten. But when our older child was really young, especially in the toddler years, we just sort of naturally move toward, peaceful parenting, or sort of that style of parenting, even unschooling style of parenting, where it was more about paying attention to his needs and building a trusting relationship with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just seemed to make sense to us to interact with him in that way. And later we did actually send him to a year of preschool around age 3, just to try it out. And it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't, he didn't seem that engaged with what they were doing. And around the same time, I happened to find a book called Free to Learn by Peter Gray. It was almost by chance. I was browsing at the library and I just saw it in the new release section. It looked interesting. And so I took it home and read it, and it just, it was sort of a revelation, but also just made sense. It was like everything that he was talking about, which is basically that children are designed to learn, and that's what they're built to do. And we don't need to teach children to learn. That's naturally what they do all the time. It just all made sense to me. It was like, of course, anybody with a toddler, a baby or toddler, can see them doing that constantly. So he also was talking about how, traditional schooling tends to squelch that natural curiosity often where, once kids start to get the idea that there's a right and wrong way to do things, they shy away from exploring. So um, I was reading that while our oldest was in preschool, and I saw that happening with him where he no longer wanted to paint and play with crayons, and it was like a anxiety around doing things, creative expression. So I had that strong feeling that, hey, we need to back away from that traditional education method.
And how did you find, I can't remember if he mentions unschooling specifically in the book. Is that how you heard about it?
He does actually. But I think from there, I also went on to read John Holt, and then I was, on Facebook and online looking at different alternative education groups and, hanging out in some of the Facebook groups and stuff. So I just continued to be curious about that and learn more about it.
That is so cool. I love that story, how you were seeing with your son unfolding exactly what you were reading about.
Yeah, it just all kind of happened together.
Yeah. So then he just didn't go back after that year ended?
Well, we were still on the fence when the next school year rolled around when he was 4. And we actually tried again, one more preschool, a different one. And the very first day went poorly. And I think that was a little bit of a push that my husband and I both needed to feel more sure of our convictions about, this, we don't want to do that. So,
yeah, because it is so different. It's a big leap at first, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, you have a great post on your blog about your autism diagnosis, and I was hoping you could share with us a bit about that journey.
Sure. So I usually like to mention that it's fairly common these days for parents of autistic children, after they recognize their kids are autistic and they start to see similar traits in themselves or their spouse, and will then go on to get an adult diagnosis. That's not exactly how it happened for me, but I think that way is a little more common. So it's worth throwing out there in case someone sees themselves in that. But for me, I didn't quite connect the dots in that way for a while, even though I had that experience of, even after I knew one of my kids was autistic, I would see, traits that were similar between us, or things he did just made sense to me, even though they were supposedly, atypical. But I still didn't quite put it together because I think that I just didn't know any autistic adults at the time. And so it didn't occur to me. But then another sort of chance occurrence was a friend of mine posted or shared on Facebook a blog post about, excuse me, a friend shared a blog post about dealing with sensory issues during changes of seasons. And it was fall at the time, and it was something that I was going through as well, but I had never heard anyone describe it as far as, like all of your clothes feel uncomfortable, even though they're just last year's clothes that fit fine, and having trouble regulating body temperature. And so I clicked through to the blog, which was Musings of an Aspie, written by an autistic woman. And I read more and more through the blog, and I recognized myself in a way that I had never done before. So from there, again, I just, did the thing that I do, continuing to learn everything I could. And there's so many blogs by autistic adults out there that are wonderful and helpful. And I started a little Facebook group for people like me who are exploring that question of whether they might be autistic. And then after 6 or 8 months, I did get a professional autism diagnosis through a psychologist in my area. And I think that at the time it felt important for me to get that diagnosis. It's not really necessary. There are sort of pros and cons to doing that. If I had done it all over again, I might not actually go that route.
Well, yeah,
But
that
that's
would be interesting. Can you share a little bit about, the pros and cons that you found about going through the
yeah,
diagnosis?
sure. Yeah, I think at the time, one of the motivations for me was to sort of validate what I pretty much already knew, and to sort of validate that in the eyes of other people, friends, family. I thought that if I had that professional stamp of approval, it would give it more legitimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say that maybe it helped a little, but I'm not sure it was that important, because I found if people believe you, they don't need that. And if they're not going to believe it for any reason, sometimes they just are uncomfortable, or maybe they also are on the spectrum and just don't like to think about it.
Yeah.
That the professional diagnosis really isn't going to sway them all that much either. So it can be helpful, especially for people who are still in school or work outside the home. It may help you get some accommodations. But, it's expensive and it's an ordeal, and if it's not necessary, it may not do that much for you, really.
Oh, that's such a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is important for people to know that it's perfectly valid to sort of, people call it self-diagnosing, but even that sort of medical language, if you identify yourself in that autistic neurotype, most people who do that have gone through so much reading and research and talking to other autistic people that that's a valid way to go about it too.
Yeah, it's such a good book, because you were talking about how there's, a lot of blogs written by autistic adults. And, when I went to Musings of an Aspie, and I really enjoyed reading some of her posts as well. And yeah, I think you're right in that if you're feeling validated, you're feeling a connection, and you're maybe, they're talking about certain situations and maybe tips and things that help them in different ways, you can pick up all sorts of tools and just maybe a sense of community without needing the diagnosis, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Then the diagnosis, like you said, would be helpful in more formal settings like school or work if you need accommodations and stuff. But, it's not necessary for you to, because I'm just wondering, some people might feel like, oh, I shouldn't be reading that. I shouldn't be, doing this research and be interested and curious about it. Like you said, you were, I need to get the diagnosis first, but it doesn't need to work that way.
Yeah, that is really common. Sometimes I see people who, people will come to an autistic group and they'll have sort of that insecurity of, well, I don't know if I really definitely am autistic or not. And, no one is checking your papers,
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you don't need a professional stamp of approval to be part of the autistic community. No one's going to demand that of you. And people don't tend to take on that identity who aren't really pretty sure that that's where they belong. So
yeah. And I mean, and if you feel a connection to the stories and you get useful information out of it, it really is irrelevant, right? It's helpful for you as a person.
Yeah. And I think everyone can relate to certain aspects of being autistic. It doesn't mean everyone is autistic, but we're all human beings, so we share some common experiences.
You have a really interesting post about the language used around autism that I really wanted to chat with you about a bit. And it's specifically around the word disabled. I was hoping you could talk about why you don't shy away from that word.
Sure. Yeah, I think one thing that I had described in the post is what's called a social model of disability, which basically says that being disabled is not a set of deficits or a lack of certain skills. It's more about the way that you are. You face certain, like a lack of access and accommodation in society. Mm-hmm. So you're disabled by that lack of access more so than there being something, wrong with you. Mm-hmm. So I think that often when people hear the word disabled, they see it as inherently negative or a lesser than way of being, but disabled people usually do not feel that way. So I encourage people to really listen to disabled people about how we feel about that label, and that it's just a neutral description of the way that we live and the way that we are. And the same goes for the word autistic. I think, often people will say people with autism or people who have autism. While most autistic people just say that they're autistic, and that's because it's not a bad word and it's not the only thing about us, but it's something about us that's important and that we're not ashamed of or embarrassed of.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of the conversation around, like with my son who has type 1 diabetes, the conversation around, are you a person with diabetes or diabetic? Right. It's just like you said, it's a part of who they are. It's not something to fear, but it does make other people uncomfortable, doesn't it? And they're uncomfortable what terms to use. They just kind of want to ignore it for a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's okay. Everybody's uncomfortable with new things sometimes, and that's all right. I think the important thing is really just to listen to disabled people. And if if they say, I prefer that you use the word autistic, then just go with it.
I think that's something that I think shines with unschooling, because we are we're focused on supporting the individual and understanding and trusting and meeting their needs and whatever, accepting their needs and their wants for as important and valuable, and just doing them. So however they want you to engage with them, or what terminology they want, whatever it is, you're just doing it because they're a whole person and they know best for themselves, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think sometimes in unschooling communities, I see that people are uncomfortable with some language around disability or with diagnoses and things like that, with labels. But I would also encourage unschoolers to realize that you can take these concepts out of that medical model, and that saying that someone is autistic, it doesn't have to be a way to pathologize them. It can also just be a way to describe something that they feel is important about themselves. It's hard to describe. I think you can, if unschoolers can sort of remove some of the language around disability away from that negative medical model, they could embrace those labels.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, that medical model, because so often when people are worried about labels and diagnoses and stuff, it's because they're bringing that whole medical package, right? They're not picking that apart. They're like, oh, well, then that means I have to do X, Y. If I have this diagnosis, I have to follow X, Y, Z pattern,
Right.
And you don't have to.
It's well intended, I think. I think what unschoolers are often trying to say is, don't put yourself down by saying you have a disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And we're saying, I agree, I don't have a disorder. I'm autistic, and it's not a disorder. It's just part of who I am. So
yeah, no, that's lovely. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of unschooling parents, pretty regularly I see questions like, will unschooling work for my autistic child? As they're trying to learn more about it. So I'm really curious how you answer that question and what some of the benefits of unschooling that you see for autistic children.
Yeah, I actually think that autistic children are a perfect fit for unschooling because I really see the foundation of unschooling as being that relationship of mutual trust and respect between parents and children.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really the bedrock of unschooling. And that's the way that autistic children really thrive, is to have that relationship with their parents where you trust that your child's unique perceptions are valid and that their unique way of being is a valid way to be. So it really goes very well with unschooling and raising your autistic child with just respect and love and trust that they don't need to be fixed, or they don't need to be taught to learn any more than a typical child needs to be taught to learn. And another thing that's a really nice fit with unschooling is, most autistic people, we like to take a really deep dive into whatever our interest is.
Yeah.
And sometimes those interests are lifelong, and sometimes they're just for a period of time, but we love to go really deep into that. And that's something that more traditional schooling methods often don't allow for, because, now it's time for science, and 40 minutes later you have to switch to math. And, with unschooling, you can allow your autistic child to just go all the way in. And that's a beautiful thing to see. I think it's really, it builds upon the natural strengths of autistic kids.
I love that answer. I know, right? It fits so perfectly. That was wonderful. I'm going to highlight that on the transcript.
Cool.
Now, I was curious as well, as an unschooling mom with autism. I saw this on your blog, and I thought it was a great connection. So I was hoping you could share some of the day-to-day supports that you found helpful. And why I love that is because, again, we're talking about the individual, right? We're back there again. And what, each of us find tools, no matter what, that help us do the things that we want to do day in and day out, right? So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So that was about sort of the daily supports that I use. And I think, again, that's something unschoolers do all the time, is balancing the needs of everybody in the family without sort of, trying to control, I guess, everybody's needs. So instead, you just try to find balance. And everybody who unschools knows sometimes you get it a little more balanced than other times. But conflicting sensory needs are very common in neurodiverse families. So, for example, one of my kids likes a lot of background noise. For him, it's just makes him feel settled, and it helps him focus, makes him feel good. While for me, background noise is actually pretty difficult. It sort of scatters my thoughts, and it makes me a little bit tense. So I use a lot of ear protection. I had written about my noise canceling headphones. Lately, I use the earbuds a little more because they're just easier to pop in and out, but people have different preferences for that stuff. But that's just one example of I think a pretty common conflict. And also, one of the really important things in our family is building in a lot of downtime. And I would say probably quite a bit more than a typical unschooling family might have. in some of my unschooling groups, people talk about going on an outing every day or 5 days a week. We could never do that.
No.
We wouldn't enjoy it. We'd be stressed out and overstimulated. So we stay home a lot, and that's okay. It works for us. And again, we, like anybody else in unschooling, we don't elevate the value of outings as being better than downtime, because for us downtime is so needed. So that's a big one for us.
I love that one because we found that too, that downtime. And yeah, if you're paying attention and you see that they're getting, like my kids got to a point where they would measure, well, if I'm going out this day, I need to have like 3 or 4 days at home.
Right.
Before that's, when you're working together as a family to meet everybody's needs, you discover what your needs are, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And some of us adults who didn't grow up that way, it can be really hard for us to figure out that stuff. And so it's so great that our kids can learn this now, because that's going to serve them for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
It's really useful.
Did you have another one you wanted to share? Because I feel like I interrupted you there.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Sometimes I'm pausing to look at my notes.
That's okay.
The other thing I'll just throw in there. I don't know. It's kind of personal, but I blogged about it. So I also take an ADD medication, which again, I know some people feel uncomfortable with that kind of medical stuff, but I see it as just a support that helps me with, I need a little bit of extra support with focus and keeping up my energy to keep up with kids and stuff like that. So that's been really great for me. And I hope people will not be too afraid to go out and get that if they need it. It doesn't change who you are, and it doesn't mean that you're not good enough. It's just another support, like headphones or anything else, a hearing aid or anything else people need to be able to do life the way they want to do it.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a great point. It is another support, and it's something, again, it's not you need or you don't need. It's try it out and see if it helps you, right? As an individual.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. One other question I wanted to ask you was about ideas about ways that unschooling groups can be more welcoming to autistic children. So in your experience, I was hoping you could share some tips and tricks for that.
Yeah, I would say, I know that you talked to Heather Lake. I listened to your episode, and she's actually local to me. She runs an unschooling group in my area, and she's been so great with just asking me, not just once, but whenever it seems necessary, how can we make this event more accessible to you? If you haven't been coming, or if you want to come but you're not sure, which is, it's so wonderful, because sometimes it's very hard to put yourself out there. If you have a disability or your kids do, and sort of, you don't want to feel like a complainer, So, for people in leadership positions to reach out locally and say, hey, if you want to be part of this, what can we do that would make it better for you? Because it won't be the same for everybody. So that's a great thing to do. And also, I think I often just wish that unschooling families, but really all families, would just talk about disability more. And unschoolers, have such wonderful curiosity and openness to new things, that I would say just bring that to this subject of disability. Like I had mentioned, there are so many great blogs, there are YouTube channels, podcasts, and don't be afraid to do it wrong. This is the strength of unschoolers, is that you're willing to go on a journey. So it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to say the wrong thing, as long as you're willing to learn what a better way. And, we disabled people are not embarrassed of ourselves.
Yeah.
So, come with us, and you get over your discomfort with the unfamiliar by learning more about it. So yeah, I guess just talk about it, learn about it will be so helpful, I think.
Oh, that's awesome. Yep. Just be curious. Be your curious self, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And share it with your kids too, because,
Yeah.
often kids aren't sure either how to interact with someone who doesn't socialize in the same way as them or something like that. So when adults sometimes are very uncomfortable around disability, kids pick up on that. They're not really sure why, but they're just like, ooh, something here is really uncomfortable, and I'll just stay away. So yeah, that's sort of the thing to move past.
Yeah, I love that. It just comes down to engaging, and I guess just, as parents, just trying to take that one step, past that uncomfortable, it's kind of like our comfort zones, right? Just stretch your comfort zone a little bit, and like you said, strike up a conversation, ask a question, because when you're engaging with them and chatting with them, then you learn more, and you get more comfortable. Your comfort zone stretches, and it's incredibly worth it, not only for the parents, but for the kids too, right?
Yeah, it is. And I have to say again about our local group that we have found that the group is really welcoming, and we can't do all the activities, and that's okay. But I have found that the families who really are open-minded and curious in that way, they're pretty easy to be around.
Yeah.
And that's really nice. I'm so grateful for that.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me today, Erin. I really appreciate it. I had so much fun chatting with you.
Oh, thank you. I was so nervous, but this was really cool.
Oh, yay. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And before we go, where's the best place for people to connect with you online?
Well, my blog is just erinhuman.com. I have a Facebook page for the blog, and I also am on Twitter at the E is for Erin. And you can also see some of my stuff that I do on the Autism Women's Network Facebook page, which is a great page. I highly recommend people follow as well.
Oh, awesome. And I highly recommend people go check out Erin's website. I just love that, erinhuman.com. It's an awesome name.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, and have a great day.
All right, you too. Thanks.
Thanks for listening. I hope you found it helpful. You might also like the backlist episodes at livingjoyfully.ca/podcast. While you're there, be sure to pick up your free copy of my book, What is Unschooling? In it, we'll explore some of the common questions people have when they first hear about unschooling, like, how will my child learn? How do I know they're learning? What is deschooling? And how do I get started? It's also available at many online ebook retailers. And if you'd like to connect online, you can find me on Facebook at Living Joyfully. Until next time, have fun living and learning with your family.